1, verses 21 through 23. Once you were alienated from God and were enemies in your minds because of your evil behavior. But now he has reconciled you by Christ's physical body through death to present you holy in his sight, without blemish and free from accusation. If you continue in your faith, established and firm, and do not move from the hope held out in the gospel. This is the gospel that you heard, and that has been proclaimed to every creature under heaven, and of which I, Paul, have become a servant.
All right. Well, 3 weeks in, and we are still in Colossians 1. So exciting. Okay. All right. Well, spoiler alert. It's going to change a point of a book, but it's written in 1844, so I feel like you've had about 200 years to read it. So it's not really a spoiler alert at this point. But in the book of the Count of Monte Cristo, we are introduced to a man by the name of Edmond Dantes. So think how you pronounce that?
Yes.
Yes, thank you. And so Edmund, when you meet him, he's a man of meager means, but everything is looking up for him. He's got a job where he is getting ready to be made ship captain. He is engaged to the love of his life, and things are going well. The unfortunate part for Edmund is that he's got terrible friends. And his friends get pretty jealous of what's going on for Edmund, how things are looking up for him. And one of his close friends, Ferdinand, decides that he is madly in love with Edmund's fiancée and decides to join in on this conspiracy to try to oust Edmund so that they can get all the good stuff that Edmund's got. And so on the day of his celebration, as he's getting ready to get married to the love of his life, he comes off the boat, he's going to meet her, and Edmund gets arrested for treason. Now, Edmund didn't commit treason whatsoever, but that conspiracy that had formed against him of his group of friends that wanted what Edmund had decided to make up some lies and betrayed Edmund on what should have been one of the happiest days of his life. And it does something to Edmund that sticks with him throughout the rest of the book. All of what I told you happens within just a few chapters of one another, but most of the book is ahead. And so Edmund's story, as you get later on, is he tries to go on a story of revenge. His goal is to try to get Ferdinand back and to show that he's not going to be put down easily. And so later in the book, he comes up with this quote. He says, "The friends of today are the enemies of tomorrow." And if we take just a step back outside of what's happened to Edmund, that is a really sad quote. Because Edmund lives the rest of his life seeking revenge. Edmund is shaped by the people around him not giving them trust, but expecting them to betray him at some point in life. And it leads down a pretty sad story for Edmund at times. See, there's something that happens to us when we experience betrayal and hostility that twist our hearts. And when we become hostile towards somebody, it plants seeds in our hearts that remain there, not just for the moment of that betrayal, not just for the moment of that experience, but it plants seeds that will rear its head and grow and drop fruit in our life, not in just the weeks or the months to come, but in the years that follow. This becomes important as we begin to follow God, and what Colossians is going to remind us is that we were at one time enemies of God. If we are not careful, that hostility that we had felt towards God will start to rise up and destroy the foundation of hope that Jesus has laid. Betrayal and hostility are very important things, well, not important, but just very tragic things in our life that lay seeds that impact us for the years to come. When we get to the story of Adam and Eve back in Genesis, Adam and Eve existed in perfect relationship with God. And one of the things that you'll see where that hostility starts to grow is that Adam and Eve were without sin, and they would walk with God in the cool of the garden every single day. And one of the things that Genesis notes is that they were naked before the Lord. Now, they're not just, God's not being silly, he's not trying to be inappropriate. What he's showing is that in that time, without sin, there was nothing to hide. There was no part of them, no part of the relationship that needed to be covered up, no part that needed to be kind of taken a step back from. You got to present all of who you were before the Lord and before Adam and Eve, before one another at all times. And what you will see is that as Adam and Eve sin, the first thing that they will notice is that they are naked. And that they will be so quick to clothe themselves to hide. And they will pull back from that relationship with God. And so what Paul's going to come in and do is going to say that that sin will constantly be rearing its head up and constantly attacking that foundation of hope that Colossians has built, that Jesus has established for us. And what Paul's going to do is he's going to hyperlink and kind of focus back on a story in Leviticus, or a law in Leviticus. So Colossians 1, and what Lori just read, is that it's going to tell us that God is going to present, or Jesus is going to present you as blameless and faultless before God. That's Old Testament language. And that sin that started in Genesis is going to work its way into humanity, and so that when the temple, when it comes time to be built in the book of Leviticus, you're going to find all of these rules and all of these laws on who can go in and who can't go in. And the one person that can only go into the Holy of Holies in the temple, which is where God specially resides, is the high priest. And the high priest has to follow all of these special rules to be able to go in there. You can only go in once a year. And part of those rules is that he's got to have clothes, linen, that is only made from one material. He cannot have two materials blended in it. And so he's got to wear special clothing that is all and holistic, all one thing. He cannot have any kind of issues with bleeding, no skin diseases. He cannot come into contact with anyone that is sick or has any skin diseases. And so for 7 days before he enters the Holy of Holies, he starts to have to follow all of these rules and pretty much remove himself from society so that he can enter in. And when you're looking in the book of Leviticus, you're seeing that and you say, man, that doesn't make sense. Because when I go into the New Testament, like, you can just approach God whenever. And we might think that God's mean or God's too strict. But what Leviticus is showing you is that if you take a step back, it's trying to show you that there's a spiritual issue, that there's something deeper that's happening. Not just the physical clothing, not just the bleeding, not just that you have to be whole, but spiritually you have to be whole as you approach God. What Adam and Eve did when they messed up and when they sinned, is they introduced something to us. And that was hostility towards God. And they pulled back from that relationship. And if we're not careful, those seeds of hostility are still with us today, and it does not take much for that plant to grow and uproot to cope. And so let's look at Colossians 1, 21 to 22. It says, once you were alienated from God and were enemies in your minds because of your evil behavior. But now he has reconciled you by Christ's physical body through death to present you holy in his sight, without blemish and free from accusation. That right there, that little section, is a hyperlink. It's linking back into the Old Testament. But what Paul wants you to see is in 21 is that once you were alienated, removed, and you were enemies of God. The interesting thing is that God did not make us his enemies. We made ourselves enemies of him. God's not the one that changed. We are. And so Paul's coming in and reminding us that we are the ones that get off kilter. We are the ones that move off the line. We are the ones that change. It is not Jesus. And so if there's a relationship issue between you and God, it's more of a you problem. You've changed. You've moved. And so there's three areas where that hostility will start to raise its head up. And remember that all of this is rooted in hope. And so that foundation of hope you have to constantly be guarding. But the first one is that it erodes trust. And so as we are going through, and even if we have followed Jesus for years and years and years, it does not take much struggle, much difficulty, or really easy season of life for us to start to distrust God. It begins really easy for us to, when things do not work out, we replace that trust with hostility and criticism. God, why aren't you coming in at this time? Lord, I was expecting you to move at this point. Lord, where are you? And so instead of filling those moments with hope and with faith, instead of filling those gaps up and saying, Lord, I'm going to trust you, we are much too easy to fill those gaps up with distrust. And when there's something that we don't understand, and when we don't think the Lord's moving quick enough, and we want the Lord to do this, and he doesn't, We don't fill those gaps up with the trust and love of Jesus. We fill those typically with the distrust and saying, God, what are you doing? And so that seed of hostility towards God still raises up within the heart. Now, the second thing that that hostility will do is it will create distance between you and God, to where you will begin to withdraw and you will feel lonely. You feel like the Lord is not really there for you. The third thing is what it leads to is that eventually you will start to have reduced satisfaction in your relationship with God. And so instead of finding fulfillment, instead of finding purpose in your relationship with Jesus, we will be quick to find fulfillment and purpose in our work, in our friendships, by turning to our phone, by wanting to be entertained, by what feels right to us. And so instead of following Jesus, man, those seeds of hostility, they will plant and they will grow fruit that will hit you in the years to come after you follow Jesus. And Paul, what he has done is he's reminding us of who Jesus is. Now remember last week that we looked at a hymn that they would have known. A hymn that they would have sung is 15 to 20. And so Paul is just reminding them of a truth that they already have and a truth that they already know, that Jesus is the one that reconciles them because they have moved off of that hope. And it is our responsibility to capture those thoughts and to remind ourselves of what actually is true. Because as we go through difficulties, we face frustration and we're trying to overcome, we're trying to be genuine, and we still have sin that just sits there and catches us offside all the times. It can be easy for that hostility to grow. And we have to meet that hostility with truth. In The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, Aslan, who is kind of the God character of this lion, gives his life for Edmund. And it's a really sad scene, and as Aslan dies in place of Edmund, the boys, Edmund and the other brother, they leave. They are overcome by grief. They're giving up. Well, what's really interesting is that the two sisters, Susan and Lucy, stay by Aslan's dead body. And what C.S. Lewis will note is that they, for some reason, can't leave his body. That there's something deep within them that is expecting that Aslan is going to do something. And so they're met with grief and loss, but there's something there that's just holding on, keeping them there. What I love is that in that story, it's Susan and Lucy who have the faith to not allow their grief and their sorrow to overcome the truth. That they meet that truth, and knowing that Aslan's going to do something, even though it looks like all hope is lost, they're meeting that and they're saying, I'm going to hold on. And part of following Jesus is that he's inviting you into your own salvation. That Jesus is the one that saves you, Jesus is the one that redeems you, but he invites you into that relationship. And so while God's the one that does everything, he reaches across and saves and redeems us, he's inviting you in to maintain your own salvation. That means that we have responsibility in that. Look at Colossians 1, 21 to 22, or excuse me, just verse 22. It says, but now he has reconciled you by Christ's physical body through death to present you holy in his sight, without blemish and free from accusation. Paul's doing is he's saying that when you experience that hostility, when you experience that you feel like you're an enemy of God, instead of when those gaps are produced and you're saying, God, where are you? Instead of filling that with trust and you're called to fill it with faith, the way that we do that is that you remind yourself of the truth of who Jesus is. But it's too easy for us to just go with what we feel, with what's happening in our gut, and we've got to make sure that we're capturing that thought and saying, no. Jesus is the one who suffered physically for me. He is the one who has redeemed me and brought me back into a relationship with God, and I'm going to trust him. Too many times when we begin to feel hostile towards God, when we begin to break down, is that we back away. What Paul is reminding us is he's reminding them of a truth they already know. It's a truth you already know. But it's something that you constantly have to work and constantly have to address. And so let's look at verse 23. It says, if you continue in your faith, established and firm, and do not move from the hope held out in the gospel. This is the gospel that you have heard and that has been proclaimed to every creature under heaven, of which I, Paul, have become a servant. So here he goes. Do not move from that hope which you are called to keep established and firm. Now what people much smarter than me say is that is a metaphor that's found throughout other Greek documents. Established and firm is not just something that has been accomplished, but it is a foundational piece where you are constantly looking around the foundation to make sure that it is in good shape. And so what happens is that as we go through life and things are either really easy for us, and so we kind of walk away from God a little bit, or things are really hard and we kind of get tempted and say, God, where are you? Is that you are called to constantly walk around the foundation of your hope and to see where those cracks are and where things have been chipped away so that you can meet that crack and that chip with the truth of who Jesus is. And so that when the Lord comes and you're saying, man, God, where are you? Why aren't you healing? Why aren't you moving in this area? That I can remind myself and say, man, it may not feel like God loves me. He may feel like he's not faithful in this moment. I might feel like God's abandoned me, but I catch that and I say, Lord, he's the one that has saved me. He's the one that has suffered everything for me. And so while I might feel abandoned, I might feel like God has left me, may feel like God's not showing up, I remind myself that he has already showed up. And I hold on to this truth, not just what I feel. Our hope is such a fickle thing. Remember that in Colossians 1, he introduces hope to you, and then he comes back and he's talking about it now. Because hope controls your faith and your love, your ability to relate to God and your ability to relate to other people. But it can be so easy to lose. And if I'm not careful, if I'm not pursuing Jesus, if I don't have my eyes set on Christ, if I'm not reminding myself of what Jesus has done, then I will sidestep and walk away from it slowly but surely. And I may not be able to tell in the first days I take that first step off, but what will matter is in the days to come when I really need that faith, when I really need that hope to hold on to, it will not be there. And so that established and firm, you are resting in what Jesus has done, but you are called to maintain that foundation in your life. Just like Adam and Eve, who were in perfect relationship with God, they stepped away. We can be in perfect relationship with him, and this side of heaven, this side of new creation, life just has a way of chipping away at our foundation. It can be so easy to sidestep and move off of Jesus. It can be so easy to be caught up in what's happening around me that I lose sight of Jesus. And as I've lost sight of Jesus, I'm caught in this whirlpool, and then it's days and weeks and months later when I'm thinking to myself, oh man, where is Jesus? Where am I at? Because it can be so quick and easy to lose the hope that you have. So your salvation and your relationship with Jesus, God's the one that does 99.999% of the work. But he is still inviting you in to maintain that foundation that he has given you. And we cannot lose sight of what Jesus has done. No matter what you were going through, no matter what you're facing, no matter whether it's a personal thing or a community thing or a state thing or a national thing or an international thing, everything that we come across tries to chip away at that foundation. And because we were once enemies of God, we were very much like Edmund, where we allow those seeds to exist within our heart. And it's that difficulty and that struggle. It is the bad news and us not being able to figure things out. It just waters that doubt. It waters that distrust. If we are not careful, that plant will root up and cause a serious foundational issue. When Victoria and I were at our first church, we got a parsonage. And I was so excited because this is like our first house. It's going to be like, I'm just excited to get out of our own. And when we looked at pictures and when we drove up, it looked like an amazing house from the outside. But in the weeks and the months that came from that, the parsonage was not well taken care of. And so when it rained, we would have water in the basement. We would have water in the walls. When we took a shower, we always had to constantly be scrubbing with bleach Clorox if we had black mold that would form in the shower. And there was just issue after issue after issue in the parsonage. So much to the point where there was one time where we had a student over and they were playing, throwing football, and one of them just barely hit the column for our roof, and it knocked the whole column loose. And it should not have happened at all. And then after we left, we got a text one day and said, "Hey, we repaired everything in the parsonage." And I was like, "Oh, thanks, guys." But the important thing is the house looked great on the outside. But because it has not been taken care of on the inside, it didn't take long for us to see issue after issue after issue. And so your faith can look great on the outside. But if you are not maintaining and keeping your eyes set on what Christ has done for you, then the moments that you need to go into that house for shelter, the moments where you really need to call on your hope and your faith, it's not going to be able to withhold, and withstand the storm that you are going through. What Paul is saying is that hope has to be constantly maintained. The way you maintain it is you keep your eyes set on what Jesus has done for you. And that when you face doubts, you remind yourself of what Jesus has already done. That Jesus has already loved you enough to redeem you, to reconcile you back to Him. And I should meet that with my doubts, my frustrations, my struggles, the things that attack my hope. And so my question for you today is, where is the foundation of your hope? And are you much more like the parsonage, where you might look great on the outside, but you know that as soon as you walk through the doors, that you're going to have a leak, you're going to have black mold growing, you're going to have issues with your walls, the foundation's not really right? Or are you constantly maintaining your hope? Constantly looking around and saying, man, here I'm noticing that I'm just trusting God. Here I notice that I'm trying to take things back into my own hands. Here I'm noticing that I'm doubting God's really loving me. And am I reminding myself of what Jesus has accomplished? And so as we're looking at your salvation, your walk with the Lord, it's not something I can do for you. It's not necessarily something the church can do for you. We can help you. But there's very much an invitation from God that you are called to help in your own salvation. Very much a responsibility of our own selves, not to save us, but to maintain our hope and to pursue it. So what are you looking at? What are you focused on? Where are you getting purpose and fulfillment? And are there any cracks and shifts in the foundation of your hope? Let me pray for us. Jesus, as we begin to wrap up Colossians 1, we're reminded of how important hope is. And Lord, I pray for each of us, myself included, that we would look to you and build our firm foundation of hope on what you have accomplished. Lord, that we would trust that you are the one that saves us, redeems us. You have died for our sins, been resurrected, and we know you and we know your love because of what you've done for us. Father, may we be able to build a strong house off of that foundation. Lord, give us the strength and the diligence to search our own hearts, our own doubts, our own struggles, and give them to you. Give us the strength to be able to capture the thoughts of, Lord, where are you? And replace them with thoughts of faithfulness, of trust. Lord, that we may not have the answer, but your word. Jesus, we look to you as our only source of hope. Sustain and maintain our faith for us, Lord, and help us to look to you